Thank you so much for being here. This evening is jointly co-hosted by the Illinois Humanities Council and the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. The school project is indeed special, looking into the history, philosophical underpinning, and controversy surrounding standardized testing. It's also a truly unprecedented collaboration with Free Spirit Media, PARCC Films, Kindling Group, Media Process Group, Siskel Jacobs Productions, and producers Rachel Dixon and Melissa Stern. They were all partners in this film. Thank you so much for being here. We look forward to a great event.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. I'm Bob Hercules. I'm one of the co-executive producers of the School Project series. The other co-executive producer is Gordon Quinn, who's right there from PARCC Films. Some of you may know we've been working on this series now really, I think, since March of 2013. So it's been a very interesting investigation into the school issues. And I thank everybody for coming. Just wanted to say a couple things. First of all, I want to thank the Illinois Humanities Council and DCASE, their collaborative city project, for having us, for sponsoring this event. We also want to thank the Cultural Center. It's always great to be at the Cultural Center because it's such an amazing building, and it's just a great place to be. We love this theater. As Michelle said, our production partners on this are Free Spirit Media, PARCC Films, Kindling Group, Media Process Group, Siskel Jacobs Productions, and independent producers Melissa Stern and Rachel Dixon. We also have what we did on this project was we put together a bunch of outreach partners, so it's a little unusual collaboration. So I also want to acknowledge our outreach partners. They're the ones who are helping to amplify our series through their various distribution channels. And they are WTTW Channel 11, who will be running the segment, or maybe they already did, I'm not sure. The Chicago Sun-Times, Catalyst Chicago, the Chicago History Museum, Ebony.com, the Community Media Workshop, StoryCorps, and thanks to CAN TV for carrying this event live. So if your friends can't be here, but they want to see it, they could actually go on CAN TV right now and watch what we're doing right now live. They can also go to cantv.org to watch the program later if they want, so either way. I also just want to remind you that our own website is schoolprojectfilm.com, and we'll have all our segments on that website. And let's see, finally, I want to thank our funders for making this all possible. The Richard Driehaus Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the Chicago Digital Media Production Fund, a program of Chicago filmmakers, and the Vocal Fund. So thank you for all our funders. And now, without further ado, I want to introduce the producer of tonight's segment, Melissa Stern.
Thank you. Hello. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. So this is a short segment, testing season, and it's designed to start a conversation. I know right now is testing season in public schools all over the country, and we're hoping that this will spark conversations, get a discussion going, and we want you to share your thoughts. There's going to be a question and answer afterwards, and you can tweet your questions to #TheSchoolProject, or go online to School Project, make your voice heard, and make your voice heard. Let us know what you think. And that's it. Enjoy the film.
To test or not to test?
At a rally in Harlem, signs read more teaching, less testing.
From the Pacific Northwest to the Lone Star State, educators are saying enough is enough.
Thousands of parents are opting their kids out of the test.
It is strictly about data and dollars.
It's March 2014, and Chicago parents and teachers are planning a citywide opt-out of the upcoming state test.
Okay, it's not just about this ISAT. It's about the insane amount of testing that our kids are subjected to every single year.
First it was the ITBS, the Iowa test, and then the ISAT. Now we're doing NWA, we do DIBELS, we do benchmark.
So it's just really about pushing back on the unjust over-testing that's hurting our students. I had one student actually pull out his eyelashes from stress. And also, frankly, they're not indicators of what they actually know.
Student assessment is an integral part of school. Teachers do it all day long through observation, assigning homework and projects, and creating tests to cover what they've taught in class. Standardized tests are one type of assessment and are usually developed by testing companies and given to thousands of students.
And because they're all taking the same test, you can compare the results across students at many different schools, often different districts, sometimes different states.
They give me the data that I need to build curriculum around what I need children to know. Without that, I'm just whistling in the wind.
We're so used to multiple choice tests. Well, the genesis of that goes way back to 1917, and it had to do with meeting a need that the Army had with respect to selecting individuals for different jobs and different roles in the military. And that actually began the large-scale use of standardized tests. And then that just led into uses in the educational arena, including developing further intelligence and aptitude tests, but also in developing tests of academic achievement. Where things really changed dramatically in terms of the use of standardized achievement tests came in with the No Child Left Behind law in 2002.
It's time to come together to get it done.
The intent of No Child Left Behind was to ensure that every public school student received the same quality of education. Schools would be held accountable through yearly standardized tests given to students in grades 3 through 8, with scores broken down for various demographic groups. The stakes were high. Rewards would go to schools whose test scores improved. Schools that didn't show adequate yearly progress could lose federal funding.
With No Child Left Behind, we moved into the era of high-stakes accountability. And that's where we've been suffering from the unintended consequences that we've developed an entire industry around testing. We have stretched the purposes of testing well beyond what they were intended to do, which was to measure a narrow band of student achievement.
On top of the yearly state test mandated by No Child Left Behind, Chicago, like many school districts, requires additional standardized tests, using the scores as part of a complex algorithm to determine everything from access into top-ranked schools to teacher evaluations and school ratings.
So test scores account for a little bit more than half of what we call the school quality rating policy. But that's down from our prior measurement, and especially across the country, we feel like it's either in line or a little bit lower than many of the other accountability systems that you see.
When you have high stakes associated with a test, it puts pressure on people to perform well, and that can be a good thing, but it also puts pressure on people to do bad practices, to maybe cheat on the tests, or to narrow the curriculum so that they're only testing subjects that are tested on the test.
The goal of every school now is to get higher test scores. So our schools are really just test score factories. That is just the opposite of what education should be.
A lot of the standardized tests we take in class don't have anything to do with the curriculum that we're learning. They don't have anything to do with our grades, and a lot of the times they're just for teacher or school evaluations.
The kids themselves start seeing school not as something that is a natural environment for them, but as a job, as a duty. So it kills the love of learning. And really, truly, as teachers, our purpose, our intent should always be to increase in them that love of learning.
Most testing is just in reading and math, and yet we are using that to draw conclusions about the entirety of a student's performance, their aptitude in the arts, in physical education, and history and science. We're tying those measures to principal performance, to school performance. We're using those as the basis of making financial decisions, for bonuses, for pay raises, and this creates a set of perverse incentives that it's not about what's in the interest of the student, but it's now what's in the interest of the adult.
I'm glad they've tied assessment to evaluation because each of us have a job to do, and you are held accountable for doing your job. And if you're not being held accountable for assessment, what are you being held accountable for?
There are ways to get evidence about student achievement that don't require us to constantly do this what we call drop-in from the sky, once a year assessment. In many cases, in many countries, they get evidence that comes from examples of classroom work. And you can do it in a standardized way. We're just sort of tied to the standardized test, partly because, and this is a very important issue, we don't trust our teachers.
They're using these tests and these scores to close our schools. They're using them to fire good experienced teachers, and frankly, the data is not accurate.
And it happens that the scores are low where the poorest kids live. The most obvious way to predict which schools will have low scores is a combination of two factors, poverty and racial segregation.
What we've shown in our work here is that a test is one part of a larger body of work, multiple measures that will be used to develop a picture and an assessment of what a student knows, how a teacher is performing, where a principal is providing good leadership, and then what that school ultimately does for kids. Last year we went from 25 tests down to 10, an elimination of 15 standardized tests.
This year, for the first time in the public opinion polls, the Gallup poll, something like 70% said there's too much testing. We don't trust it, we don't like it.
As a parent, I believe I have the right to guide the education of my son.
Dozens of parents of CPS students say the standardized test, called the ISAT, is nothing but a waste of time.
Opt-out has been something that's growing here in Chicago and across the country. We didn't really know how big it was going to be last year. We just knew that, here's this test, the ISAT, it's going away. It's not going to be high stakes for anyone. So we ended up, I think, having about 2,000 students last year opt out.
So I opted out of my ISAT test, and it totally worked. Each time people would come up to me kind of a little more interested, like, oh, okay, so why is it that you don't take these tests? Oh, is that, okay. Oh, you have a packet here with information? Okay, I'll take that home to my mom. Like,
what it's important to know is the protests last year were only in a very, very few number of schools, involved a very, very few number of students. But what it did was it got our attention, and it's helped us focus more, I think, on how we message, how we get that out there, so that people can understand that especially with the coming tests with PARCC, we're going to be part of something larger, and that where we move the work forward is by focusing on Common Core, focusing on a higher level of instruction and a greater level of rigor, and then testing that with a new set of tests that have high expectations.
Illinois began administering the new PARCC test in March 2015. Amid concerns that the test was not ready for such wide-scale use, CPS had asked the State Board of Education for permission to only test 10% of students. The board denied that request, saying that unless it was administered across the district, they would withhold all state funds, $1 billion or more. This decision prompted many parents to organize against the PARCC test.
This year we're also trying now to actually get some strong legal clarity on opt-out by passing a law in Illinois that says parents have the right to opt their children out.
We do know from the research that if teachers use assessment close to instruction to make judgments about how their students are learning and then act on that information because it's diagnostic, then learning goes up. We are way out of balance in the sense that very little goes to supporting the teacher in the classroom in the ongoing process of instruction.
I think just educating parents more and more about what high quality education should look like can really make a difference.
I think that there will be more discussion about testing. When the Seattle teachers boycotted, the discussion started, and there were great results from that. Hopefully there'll be something similar here. I'm hopeful.
So we're about to get our panel started, but before I do, I want to recognize the public officials who have joined us tonight. We have State Representative Will Guzzardi from the 39th District. And Committeeman Raymond Lopez of the 15th Ward. And have I missed anyone else? Thank you for coming out, and thank you for your support of the school project. And now I'd like to introduce Linda Lenz, our moderator. Linda is the founder and publisher of Catalyst Chicago, which has been reporting on school reform in Chicago since 1990. Congratulations on your 25th anniversary. Linda has also won numerous awards for her writing, her editing and reporting, including the Studs Terkel Community Media Award. And she's also the former president of the National Education Writers Association. And Linda and Catalyst have been wonderful partners for us in the school project and an invaluable source of invaluable resource. So thank you.
It's been great for us too. Thanks.
Thanks.
Why don't the panelists come up, and I'll learn to speak right into the microphone. And while they are, actually, have you been told what your order is? Oh, we need to get it right for CAN TV. So why don't you come up, and Susan, you're sitting next to me. And then there's Cassie, and Juan, and Mary, and Dahlia. And as you're getting settled, in case there's someone in this room who isn't thoroughly immersed in this topic, just a few words of setup, which I think you will have seen in the film. Testing is a complicated topic. It weaves in and out of all sorts of other issues, from whether we trust teachers, as Jim Pellegrino talked about, to whether your kids can get into an elite school. And I've detected a range of opinions about standardized testing, ranging from you should get rid of it entirely, to you keep it but you cut it back, you keep it but you cut back the stakes, and there are a variety of things there. It's particularly complicated now because we are moving from a state-only test, the ISAT, into a multi-state test called the PARCC. And just about everybody agreed that the old tests were not very good. They didn't set standards that were very high, and people got the impression that their kids were doing really well, even on more basic skills, when they were not necessarily doing that much better. And it's adding to the confusion, too, is that we're now switching to an online administration of the tests. So there is just a whole lot of stuff going on here. And my personal goal is to understand sort of what the options are and what the implications are. And so I'm going to start by giving a stand to see who's in favor of it and get some discussion going around that particular stand. But first, let me introduce the panelists. Susan Goldman, she's co-director of UIC, University of Illinois Chicago's Learning Sciences Research Institute, and a distinguished professor of psychology and education in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. She's recipient of a long list of honors, appointments, and distinctions, which you can read about in the program. She conducts research on subject matter learning, instruction, assessment, and on roles of technology and literacy and especially in literacy and math. Okay, Cassie is a founding organizer of More Than a Score, a coalition of parents, teachers, and community members fighting against the misuse and overuse of standardized testing in CPS. She's on the board of Raise Your Hand, a Chicago-wide public education advocacy parent group, and she is a parent of a third grader and a preschooler formerly in CPS and now enrolled in the private Waldorf schools. Juan Gonzalez, very interesting background. Degrees in electrical engineering and liberal arts, got into the Peace Corps, taught high school mathematics in Benin for 2 years, went through a program back home at DePaul University, ended up in CPS, where he has been for 24 years, teaches at Drummond Elementary. Mary Fergus, she's the spokesperson at the Illinois State Board of Education, and we do keep her busy. Prior to joining ISB, Mary was an award-winning reporter at Chicago Tribune and the Houston Chronicle, where she wrote about everything under the sun, including education. And we seem to be moving back toward that as well, unfortunately. And finally, Dahlia Flores, who is lifelong educator, teacher, principal, network, and district administrator. She's Deputy Chief of Staff to Chicago Public Schools CEO Barbara Byrd Bennett. Before that, she was on the CPS Office of Teaching and Learning, where she helped develop the interdisciplinary Latino and Latin American Studies curriculum. So thank you all for joining us. Is there anyone here who would get rid of standardized testing completely? Well, I guess I'm a little bit surprised. I'd expected a hand to go up. What about keeping the standardized tests but cutting back on the amount of time spent on them? Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, yeah, more or less. Tell me about the more or less. What are you thinking? And speak into your microphone, please.
Well, I think that the issue of standardized testing is just the tip of the iceberg. It really needs to be seen in the context of what the goals of education are and how we're trying to get there, and the role that we see for the wisdom of practice that teachers bring to the classroom, and the needs and assessments that they make on an ongoing basis are just as much about assessment. It's not, quote, standardized, but it's very close to instruction. And as Jim Pellegrino said, the closer it is to instruction, the more useful the information for tailoring instructional experiences to what a student needs. So I think that when you talk about assessment, you have to understand the functions and purposes for which it's being used, and then suit the sort of assessment instrument to that purpose.
And how would you use standardized testing?
I think that they're a reasonable accountability measure at some level, but the level is not necessarily at the level of the student. It may be more at a systems level or even a school level, but we don't necessarily have to test every child every year in math and writing and reading to know that.
Okay, Mary, how does the state react to that?
Well, the state would say that right now the federal government does require us to test students through third through eighth grade, and at least once in high school. And as the film said, it really became more common during No Child Left Behind. It was required before that, but it frankly wasn't done very well. And with all the problems with No Child Left Behind, the one good thing that it did was it put a laser sharp focus on how all students were doing. And the state would, my bosses and our board members would say they want to keep that focus. They want to ensure that we're still testing all students, because otherwise we won't know how they're doing. And in the past, we saw that some groups were hidden, and we weren't clear how well students with disabilities or students in poverty or Latino students or African American students were doing. We didn't talk about the achievement gap, and we didn't certainly talk about trying to narrow the gap. And that's a conversation that we've had in the past 10 years and that we're still wrestling with. We're still trying to figure out how to narrow that gap, but we need that data to be able to track that. We all need to ensure that all students have access to the same education and that we're reporting that performance.
Dahlia, what does CPS want standardized test data for?
Okay, I thought I was answering the question with regards to eliminating the amount of testing.
Go ahead.
Numbers
Go for
of
it.
tests. So for that one first, I think that echoing what both of the panelists have said with regards to meaningful tests that are aligned to the types of instructional experiences that students are experiencing in the classroom is important. Being able to hold ourselves accountable to the results and to the growth in students' education is critically important as well. I think there is an opportunity always to be reflective and responsive so that we can eliminate any overlap and any unnecessary testing. And I think that that's something that we're definitely looking at with regards to transitioning from NWA and PARCC, and just ensuring that, yes, we need to have a pulse on how students are learning. That data is extremely valuable for teachers to make determinations on instruction. I assessed my students all the time. It wasn't always paper pencil. Sometimes it was through, anecdotal things, observations. You're constantly keeping a pulse, and in order to respond and, adjust your teaching or adjust a strategy. And so I think we would definitely look more to being reflective and trying to eliminate any overlap and any unnecessary testing.
So is NWEA going away?
I'm sorry?
Is NWEA going away?
We haven't made that decision yet.
Okay. Yeah, talk about use of tests in the classroom. Oh. There we go.
There you go. So I'm going to just hitch on a word that you say, reflection. Most important when it comes to any kind of assessment. Then I'm going to put it out there that in order to reflect, you need time. And I'm not talking about a short amount of time. You need time enough so that whatever it is that you did, you can take a look at it and you can make good sense of it. I argue that we overtest our kids way too much. My middle school team and I, we were sitting this week trying to plan for May, and we just couldn't do justice to our kids because in the month of May, we have PARCC Part 2 coming up. We have the REACH assessment coming up. We have algebra exit exam, and we have NWEA map test. We were trying to give a break to our kids between one test and the other. We couldn't find the time. Seriously, and I apologize, some of my kids are here right now. Your month of May is going to be full of tests. I wash my hands of those tests. Now, my position in testing is the following. I believe that we should move to grade span testing. So, what we do, instead of every kid every year, we test kids once in 3rd to 5th grade. Let's not start young. Let's not do kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade. Seriously, that is just unfair and almost cruel to those little guys. So span testing, 1's 3 to 5, 1's 6 to 9, 1 10 to 12, one time. Now, what do I want those tests to do? I don't want them to be high stakes. Really, seriously, to take that one test and make it so important so that our kids' future depends almost literally on that one day how they perform. It is so unrealistic. It's so unfair to our kids. It needs to be a standardized test that guides instruction. The only purpose for assessment should be to guide instruction. It should not be to hold teachers accountable. Let's find a better way to do that, people. By the way, that statement out there about trusting teachers, you know what? You got to do that. I've been doing some reading. I don't know if you guys are aware, but as a system of education in the United States, we actually have been improving over the last, since 1971, which is when the first time the NAEP test was given out. Our performance has been improving steadily. We are right now at the highest performance that we've ever had since that time. So chew on that.
Yeah, as I said, it weaves in and out of all sorts of issues. Okay, Cassie, what would you do with standardized testing?
I would say, I don't think I would say outright we have to eliminate every single bit, but I would say that a key problem with the quantity that we're seeing, with the lack of time for other things that it's pushing out, is because of the stakes that are attached to the tests. The fact that we have these high stakes decisions about students, about teachers, about schools, and that is really what is driving the amount of testing, the amount of time on test prep, the narrowing of the curriculum, pushing these inappropriate levels of academics down into K through 2, and it's really those the accountability things that are attached to the tests. So unless we fix that, I think even grade span testing would not necessarily relieve the pressure that we've seen on, especially the teaching profession. And so, I think really for almost any purpose that we're using standardized testing right now, there is a better method and better techniques and better tools that have a better cost-benefit ratio. And unfortunately, we can't even explore those.
Give an example of a tool.
So say evaluating how a school is doing. There's numerous countries around the world where you have a panel of experts that come and observe and speak with the professionals in the school, speak with the students, families, and put together a qualitative picture of what the school culture is like, what the school needs, what supports it's lacking, and that gives you an idea of how is that school doing. And that's something that we could do instead of, the data-driven, purely qualitative, pseudo-objectivity of standardized tests.
Okay. Brought up test prep, and you had an interesting comment about test prep in the park. Why don't you share that?
Yeah, so
Into the microphone.
One of the problems with the standardized testing is the 3 months prior to the date of the standardized test, the teachers are mandated to spend at least 45 minutes a day practicing to take the test. Well, there's been reports, I think the Consortium of School Research issued one several years ago showing that schools in Chicago that spent all this time on test prep did no better than schools that didn't spend time on test prep but that taught. And so what you have going on is kind of a trade-off now between all of the surround of taking a standardized test, the test prep, the emphasis on those, the narrowing of the curriculum, teaching those things that seem to appear on the test year after year after year, and not teaching other things. All of that just sort of drives the whole curriculum and shuts out all of the other things that kids need, that teachers know they should be teaching, and that really enrich a kid's experience at school. It is not surprising to me that we have a lot of students being ready and willing to opt out because, school is not real fun these days. And for teachers or students, but it could be. We have very capable students, we have very capable teachers, and we're not giving kids a chance to learn or teachers a chance to teach.
But can you prep for the park? And talk a little bit about how that test is different. And
so the park and the Common Core standards, I have to say that there's a whole now bundle of stuff that's happening, which is a kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And I want to speak to the standards that the Common Core introduces are really about the kinds of skills you need to be a functioning citizen in the 21st century. You need to know how to think critically. You need to know how to make an argument. You need to know how to critique somebody else's argument. All of those things are part of what's in the Common Core. I think that it doesn't go, it's just a set of standards though. It does not tell you what students need to know in order to achieve those standards. That is the work of unpacking the standards that teachers have not had time to do, that our curriculum supervisors and people have not had time to do, to say, well, if a student is going to give me that performance, what do we need to teach? And what do the students in my school need that students in somebody else's school might have? So how do we adjust achieving those standards? How do we adjust our instruction to meet the needs of students so that all students can achieve these standards, which I believe they can, but it takes potentially differential kinds of instruction, but that's an analysis that teachers have not had time to happen. I just want to make one point that this is no surprise that teachers need time for this kind of implementation, but when you look at what's happened at the policy level, it has really, really, I think, thrown a monkey wrench into the whole thing. I think it has taken what could be good about this and what could be good about the PARCC assessments, because they're pretty aligned with the standards. They're problem solving. They're asking students to apply what they've learned how to do, and they ask them to think. I don't think anybody is necessarily against that. But it takes time. It takes time to do that, and it takes time to do instruction that teaches students to do that. It's a multi-year phenomenon. So I like the idea of grade spans for certain kinds of things. There may be other things that we want to do drop-in checks on, but again, this sort of tying everything to teacher accountability is just, it's the wrong way to go. It's just the wrong way to go.
Well, what information should schools give the public about what's happening in a school? I moved to town someplace. What is it I should expect to get? I mean, people look at test scores. What should they look at instead? Don't all jump in.
I think one of the things that, at the state level we're trying to do is kind of like CPS discussed, give multiple measures. So we revamped our report card to reflect more metrics, not just the ISAT score, but graduation rates and the percent of children or students that get at least a 21 on the ACT. That's not to say that's the score that you all aspire to, but it's one way of looking at how well your school is doing. The other thing that kind of speaks to the idea of looking at school environment is the 5 Essentials survey, which is a survey of school climate and learning conditions. Again, it's something that teachers and students fill out, and Chicago has had it for many years. We made it statewide a couple years ago. So there is an effort to give a fuller picture that it is more than a score, that it is really about a whole bunch of factors, graduation rates, how, leadership, safety, all, it is, for years we just talked about those scores. As long as I've been at the state board, that's the #1 story that reporters call me about. And there is so much more to education that we're not discussing.
How do you like those? You caught my eye, so go ahead.
We get this question on Facebook from parents in Raise Your Hand, and something that I think everyone says is don't look at those test scores. Visit the school, talk to the teachers, talk to parents, talk to students, observe what that school feels like when you walk in the door. You'll see student work, hopefully you'll see student work like on the walls, around. You'll see students interacting and what their school day is like. And those are the things that actually are gonna matter to your child when they're there. Even as a layperson, as a parent, whether that is a good learning environment for a child or not. And really, even as we push to these multiple measure quantitative things like the 5 Essentials, once we make those a high stakes thing, that also really warps them. There's something called Campbell's Law. As soon as you attach this importance to the social science indicator, it suddenly becomes warped. And we know now that, with the My School, My Voice survey, principals tell their staff and their students and their families, this is going to matter for our school rating. Don't be honest. Give us a good rating. I mean, that's just rational. That is a rational thing. And unfortunately, if you looked at the 5 Essentials surveys before it became high stakes, it probably was more interesting than it is now.
So, but are there enough of those other measures? I mean, you can't sort of game all of them. Is there enough out there to, or maybe you can, I don't know.
Once you attach high stakes, people will find a way to game them. And I think you just can't get away with, visible evidence going in and visiting a school.
So what should have high stakes, if not tests?
I think we should have higher stakes on our elected officials who are providing, deciding, how our schools are resourced, deciding how equitable our public education system is, and truly looking if every child is getting what the most wealthy families in our state are providing for their children. And what those families are providing for the children are not standardized tests.
Go ahead.
So, I've heard the comment from both people that have spoken on this issue. It's like, don't look at the scores. Don't just look at the scores. Can you picture how everybody's just looking at the scores? Isn't that a sad state of affairs when we actually have to go and tell people that is not the whole picture? There is more to it than just the score, right? So what would I do to show my school to parents? So right now we're getting ready to have our 6th graders come up to middle school, and we're talking about bringing our parents into the school and telling them all the things that we do. Not the scores, it'll come up, they'll ask. But that is not our focus. So we're gonna tell them how we have conservation programs that take our kids to the river, and they have them do restoration work. We'll have a science expo day. So there is other activities. There's going to be a science expo day. We invite the community. We invite our parents to participate with us on that. So have them be there during the activities that show the real learning of kids. Look, standardized tests assume that kids are standard, that there is a mold for kids when they are about to come out, and then every kid gets molded the same and gets brought in. There is no standard kid ever whatsoever. So what happens is that with standardized testing, all of my creative kids get left behind, and all of my alternative thinkers get left behind. That's just unfair to those kids. The best aspect of a school is the school itself. So parents visit the school. I find also a little bit disturbing that we have to have parents go and measure a school against another school. I think we have to put it on our politicians, our public leaders, to make it happen so that there is a system in which all the schools are good. And then the only thing you are going to worry about, the only thing you should worry about is, which one is the furthest away from your house.
Yeah. How would you decide which kids get to go into those selective enrollment schools, if you have them?
There shouldn't be selective enrollment schools. All of them should be selective enrollment schools. Let's do it the Finland way.
Go ahead. You want to jump in?
So I think that I want to just say that we need to balance. We need to spend less money putting money into Pearson's pocket, and more money locally, and so to create a better balance, we need to actually rebalance the system between large-scale accountability and assessments that are close to the classroom, close to the teacher, close to the student, and close to the learning that's going on. I think the way you can tell something about the quality of the education is to say, well, to a teacher, how do you know how well my student is doing? And if a teacher can pull out work the student has done and say, this is a really good piece of work because, and share with the parent the criteria that they're using, right? That's important because that tells the parent what their child is engaged in intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, and the climate that the teacher knows the student. Now, admittedly, at high school level, it gets a little harder when you've got 150, but we also need to think about the way we're structuring the workday for teachers. Almost every country that outscores us on international tests treats their teachers much differently than we do. The workplace is a learning environment for teachers, principals, curriculum people, and students, but we don't engage teachers that way in our schools, and we need to. They need time to learn about their kids, learn about new methods, instruction, etc. And it's not part of their workday, but it needs to be.
All right, now it's time for you all to ask questions. Stand up. We have one or two people with a microphone who's going to move around. You can tweet us questions and comments. The hashtag is #TheSchoolProject and another hashtag testing season. So I'm turning it over to my colleagues out in the audience. Do you want to start over here?
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm going to be reading some questions from Twitter and Facebook. So if you're shy, feel free to post any questions you have there. So the first question I have is from a special ed teacher. Her name's Katie Osgood. And she listed a bunch of different instances in which her kids had become extremely stressed out by testing, that they were pulling out their eyelashes, that they were showing extreme levels of being disrupted by the whole process. So she just wanted to know, is it worth it to put kids through that?
I think the panel has sort of already said no. I don't know if anything you can do around the testing to make it less stressful, but.
I mean, I think having been a former classroom teacher and even a student, and all of us up here and in the audience have gone through, whether it's high school, college, and onward, testing is the idea of sitting down and taking a test, like when I took my test to become a teacher, or when I took the test to become a principal, or someone takes a test to become a doctor, it's a very stressful event. It's like the time to show what you know. And I have found that the more the experiences that lead up to that prepare me for that, help me to build confidence, help me to, be exposed to the types of, ways that I might have to demonstrate my learning, the more the anxiety kind of drops, right? And so I think that's a very unfortunate thing to hear about, and it challenges us to think about how are we preparing children and exposing them to, experiences that are embedded within their learning environment that helps them to be more confident and have more of an ease in showing what they know and showing what they've mastered. It's going to be a part of college. It's a part of getting into, different certifications and organizations. And, it is when we think about preparing students for college, career, and life, that's a component of it. It's one that we've all experienced. And so, we don't want to see that happen. And I think if it's too much testing, or if there's, there's a root cause to that problem, and really trying to find a way to solve that.
I mean, I think I would say on that the root cause is that we're using this testing inappropriately, and we are clearly transferring the stress that adults feel down to children. There's many children who it's absolutely completely inappropriate to expose to these tests, and I think more and more there actually is a path to adulthood that does not involve these tests at all. 800 colleges and universities do not require standardized tests for admissions, and these are some of the best, strongest places in the country to go. So I would certainly tell students who suffer from test anxiety that you do actually have a route to adulthood that does not involve that, and also there's no evidence that subjecting children to painful things that they will be subjected to as an adult strengthens them to prepare for that. And in fact, really, I think nurturing children is actually the way to make them strong adults, and protecting them from the worst of things. Stress actually does very bad things to children's brains.
Okay, thank you. Out to the audience.
Okay, I have a question, and that is, what criterion is used to determine what tests to use, and how is validity and reliability in these tests verified?
So it's who decides, and how do they decide what the tests are?
Right. We know that certain publishing houses have a monopoly on producing tests, but how does the state or CPS go about choosing a particular or several different standardized tests, and what is the reliability and the validity behind these tests?
Mary, do you want to go first, and then Dahlia?
Well, with PARCC, we had two choices, PARCC or Smarter Balance. Those were the two tests that were designed from the ground up to measure learning according to the new standards. So we chose PARCC. I don't know why we chose it over Smarter Balance. We're one of 12 states that are testing with a PARCC this spring, 5 million students. It's sort of answering a lot of the complaints we heard on the video and that we're voicing here. It's a more engaging test. It tests critical thinking. There's writing at every grade level. We didn't have that before. And it should be a case where students feel like it does reflect what they're doing in the classroom. It's designed to reflect what goes on in the classroom. So the students that said this is nothing like my classroom experience, hopefully that won't be the case with PARCC, that they are being exposed to exercises and discussions in the classroom, and they're debating and they're engaged, and that the test feels the same, that it's very similar.
What about CPS?
So you spoke to the PARCC, so I'll speak to some of the assessments within CPS. Some of those are decided at the school level, and so as far as like benchmark testing, diagnostic along the way, teachers and principals would look at different indicators. At the district level, for example, in K2 in primary literacy, we're looking at, is there an assessment at the school that's measuring students, building of phonetic and phonemic awareness, like their literacy skills. We don't mandate that it has to be a certain test. Some of our schools use MPG. which is part of NWA. Some of our schools use DIBELS TRC, some schools use other. The REACH Student Performance Task was created by teachers for teachers through collaboration with the content offices, so that's something that's kind of tested through a collaborative committee that brought those and put those together. And then as far as NWA, going through a process and looking at alignment to Common Core state standards and being able to provide real-time data that teachers can use and manipulate. So those are just some of the pieces that go into play when determining different types of assessments.
Did you have a quick addition?
Yeah, well, with respect specifically to validity and reliability, for example, on the PARCC, Pearson, the company that is actually creating the PARCC and scoring it, et cetera, has not actually released any validity studies. And apparently, I don't know when they're going to, given that they're giving the test right now. So it's very unlikely that they're it actually is a valid measure. We haven't seen evidence of that. Some of the questions weren't even field tested, actually. And also, for example, the REACH tests, those are standardized in that teachers don't make them in the classroom, but they are never tested for validity or reliability of, what they're supposed to be showing, that a teacher, has improved these students, grown them, and there's certainly no studies to demonstrate that that's the case.
Do you have another? Quickly?
I just wanted to add very quickly that part of the issue and part of the reason I think there's been this sort of rush to implementation, especially for accountability purposes of the PARCC, it's been a rush because this is the first time that it's been given on a large scale. Their field test was very small. To use it for accountability is just inappropriate right now. It really is. We need data over several years. We need to know what happens in schools when these tests are given. For example, the bandwidth of the technology in some schools is such that they shut everything else down. Nobody else could use the internet while kids were taking the test because they were worried that the system would crash. These are implementation issues that have not been vetted, and until they're vetted, we don't really know about how well they're actually assessing what they claim to be assessing. So I think using them in the way we're trying to use them for accountability and teacher evaluation right now is just inappropriate.
Can I say, I'm just putting it out there that any of these tests really should not be used for teacher accountability. Let's find better ways to do that.
Another
the
question.
PARCC is not used for teacher accountability.
Yet.
Not yet. I mean, but if you, no, probably not next year because you need a couple years of data before you can show growth. And the other thing is, if you've looked at the evaluation law in Illinois, I think it's probably more flexible than a lot of states. There's 3 types of assessments you can choose from. It doesn't mandate that 50% of the evaluation must be based on growth. It starts at the base is 30%. So you can use locally designed assessments to measure growth under our law. A teacher and, it has to be decided by the teachers union or a group of teachers and the district. They have to hammer out an agreement about what assessments are used for the teacher evaluations under law here in Illinois. So it's very, I can't say that PARCC will never be used by a district, but there's a lot of other ways that you can measure student growth, and I can tell you more about that if you want.
I want to catch another question over here now.
Yeah, we have a question from the audience.
So I'm an assistant principal, and we just finished parking, as we call it. But something that wasn't discussed is what's the balance between, or what's the benefit between standardized testing versus all the time that is lost from instruction? Between access testing, I work in a primarily Hispanic district where 80% of our kids speak another language, so almost all of our students are given access tests. So our ESL teachers are taken out of the classroom for a month. We had all our literacy interventionists, every extra ancillary staff member that we had help with PARCC testing. And now, we just did it. We're going to do it again in a month. So that's at least 20 hours of instruction kids lost, not even to mention the other kids. So, I guess this is really for this, a representative from the state. I know you're a spokeswoman, so I don't know how, involved you are and how you carry our messages back. But, where's the balance? How does this test or any of these tests outweigh losing all this instruction?
Are you in, do you mind sharing what district you're in?
I'm in Cicero, which is very similar to CPS.
Yeah, okay. You know, the park is about 8 to 10 hours on average, and that accounts for about far less than 1% of the average instructional school year.
But we give it twice.
Yeah, it's in total an average of 8 to 10 hours.
But online testing, it took about an hour and a half to get set up because nothing works with the technology.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I'm just talking from a student perspective. It's less.
I gotta say, from a
far
student
less than
perspective.
1% of the instructional time for the school year. This one test, the PARCC, which is broken up into 2 parts in many sessions, and we're talking about giving, you know, the test in no more than 2 sessions per day. So, I mean, I heard a lot of things as the PARCC rolled out, and some of it just wasn't true.
Right.
I think we're still, you know, it's new, and we're still learning, and we're still communicating what the PARCC is and what it's not. I see some people shaking their heads.
Yeah. I mean, I would like to speak towards that.
Cassie?
I am not a parent with
Cassie?
a child in public school right now, but I'm sure many people in this audience can talk about how many IEP minutes for special ed students are being missed, and it certainly is more than 1% of their IEP time. There are many students K through 2, even pre-K through 2, whose days and weeks, now the testing window is 40 days of the school year, and all 40 days are potentially upset, even for students who are not taking that test at all. That is kindergartners who are not allowed to use the bathroom on a regular basis, or are, you know, their recess is removed, all their specials are lost. I know at, for example, an IB school here in the city, the IB committee is coming to evaluate, but the students can't use the library for the entire month of March, so they couldn't even do their projects. So to say that only 1% of their school day or their school year is disrupted is just not accurate. And that is a talking point that Chris Cook has repeated over and over again about the PARCC, but it's not true, and we need to really realize that is not the case. 8 hours of testing.
I think you're talking about, you know, it's a difference between the prep time and everything, but I've done the math. I can show you it. I can show you how I calculated
Step
it.
into
It's
a
not
school
just a talking
and watch
point.
it in action. You need to see it in action. I understand it. It's 10 and a half hours in a perfect world where you have, you know, 4 staff. It took 5 staff members to just get a class of 25 kids set up on PARCC, ready to go, and technology staff. So, and you know, it's in a perfect world, 10 and a half hours or, you know, 21 hours now and then in the end of the year, but that's not the reality because you need to use the technology, you need staff to help with it.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about, you know, I do hear you, and I think, you know, you were talking about a lot of staff time, and I get that.
Yeah.
So it's taken an enormous amount of staff time to prepare for the administration of this test.
Yep.
Another question over here.
Hi, my name is David. I am from Chicago, grew up in Chicago, went to Chicago Public Schools, grew up on the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, and it prepared me to get into Whitney Young. And then I got into college, and I went to law school and all those other things. And so I subscribe to the testing model. Now, sitting here, I hear the other side, and so I am warm to the point of there has to be a mix. There has to be this happy medium that where people who have students who want to opt their children out of the test, that they should have the opportunity, they should have the option to do that. However, those parents who have students who are high achievers, they should have an opportunity to test as much as they want to test, and so that they can be ready to be those types of people who are going to take the necessary exams to get into the high-level colleges as well as the professional schools, whether it be the MCATs, so that they can take the MCAT to be a physician, or the DAT to be a dentist, or the LSAT to be a lawyer, which are all standardized tests, as we know. And if you're not ready for them, there's no grade. Either you pass or you fail. And so I'm glad that CPS has the option for my son to go to selective enrollment schools. Granted, there should be more, but unfortunately they're not, but I'm glad that option is there. My last point is the benefit of having these tests is that for those kids, particularly those young black kids who in years past matriculated through the system and they couldn't read. And they ended up graduating, but really not ready to go to high school and not ready to go to college. To have the standardized tests so that we know that this kid is not ready, and we know at 3rd grade or 4th grade that this kid doesn't know his or her ABCs or those other things, then you have that tool to intercede right there or intervene right then and say, how can we catch this kid before they get to be 14, 15 years old, because we know what happens then. And so that is one of the benefits. Again, there has to be a middle ground, but to throw out, and I know it's not going to happen, and we all know it's not going to happen, but to throw out the baby with the bathwater, as they say, not only is it not going to happen, but it should not even be proposed, because we have to have the mechanism to catch the weakest of us.
Anybody want to comment?
I'm happy to talk about it. The truth is still, though, really these tests are primarily a measure of income. They're primarily a measure of whether you speak the standard dialect and hear the standard dialect in your home and in your community. That is the prestige dialect of English in our country. They're a measure of whether your parents speak English at home, and they're a measure of all kinds of societal factors, and they aren't necessarily a measure of learning at all. And if we are missing children until age 15 and we don't know how their academics are doing, that is not because the use of a test or not use of a test is not the solution to that problem. And if we were ignoring kids from age 8 until their teenage years, this is something that could be fixed by having small class sizes, by making sure your school actually has all the resources that it needs to make sure that you have certified teachers who were trained as educational professionals, and that they are treated as professionals, and that we have a school culture that is welcoming to parents, so that parents feel welcome in the school and they're comfortable talking to teachers, they're comfortable talking to principals, and they know that their home community and culture is respected, and that is a factor in whether a parent really knows what's going on with their kid in that school. And you don't actually need a standardized test to do that at all. And if we are neglecting huge swaths of the population, that is not something that we can just fix with a test. And we've been doing high stakes testing for 15 years. Do we really think we're not throwing away a lot of kids' lives? Actually, we've been throwing away a ton of kids' lives.
Briefly.
Cassie, I think I think a lot of people at the state board would agree with everything you just said. I just think we need more resources to do a lot of the things like smaller class sizes. We've seen cuts to state education funding for the last since 2009. We're not even at 2009 levels right now with what the state contributes to education, and we're probably going to see more cuts this year. That's what's proposed. So it's a lot of
And yet we're dumping
things.
$40 million a year for the next 4 years on a PARCC test that we don't think is actually going to show us anything about our schools that's interesting and meaningful.
Well,
It's very unfortunate that you guys are forced into that position, but we have to take it as parents and community members and push back and push for the things that will actually get us the resources and get a state organized in a way where we have equality and equity.
Dahlia.
Yeah, I think a lot of what the gentleman, I didn't catch your name, David, a lot of what David shared with regards to having a balance, I think, is really important. And the person that you're describing when you were speaking about low income and ethnic, I immigrant from Mexico. English was my second language. There were many times through my schooling that I was homeless, that our family was experiencing poverty, experienced lots of things, and it was an opportunity for. In my experience and in a lot of other students to be able to identify that there is some sort of need, and then having the conversation to then determine what is that need. Is it how can we support academically? Are there wraparound services that need to come in? What are the other aspects that may or may not be related to that particular assessment? But I think you know, the balance is really important, and being able to identify when students are struggling through their educational experiences and provide the appropriate supports, whether they're behavioral, whether they're social emotional, whether it's through wraparound services, you know, it's critically important.
Short.
And unfortunately, we're still not doing that good. I mean, we still have 20 to 50% of students, after doing everything they thought they needed to do and graduating high school, landing in a remedial course in college. And we still have like 25% of students.
That speaks to the standards, and I want to come back to the point that the bar is being raised. It needs to be raised because we're not in an agrarian society anymore. We're not even in an industrial society anymore. We're in a knowledge age. And you really need to be able to read, to write, to think about the information that you come in contact with. Those are the things we need to aspire to. I don't think that without sort of taking a step back and saying, how do we need to be organizing our schools so that that happens, children become versed in these ways of thinking about the world. How do we organize our educational experience, both from the standpoint of families, teachers, and students, so that students are not lost or not, quote unquote, left behind? Some people call that the No Child Left Untested bill. But the fact is that we need to be thinking about what are our priorities and what are our values for how we allocate resources in our society so that we do meet the educational needs of the students and of the people charged with educating them. We're not doing that very well right now. And that's the message I think we as voters need to be taking to the people that we elect.
Okay. Juan, briefly, and then
yes.
I'll get a question over here.
Back to your question, David. So this whole thing about, okay, assessment is good and it worked for you. The thing is, David, you're a good test taker. Dalia, you're a good test taker.
I wasn't always.
There are many kids that are not good test takers. That doesn't mean they're not brilliant. I've seen their brilliance. They shine, but they fade on the day of the test. So how do you provide justice to those kids? You can't with the standardized test. You just can't, period. So do we do a disservice to those kids just because it works for some kids? We can't, we shouldn't. The whole thing about having to take a standardized test to find out if somebody can or cannot read, that is not necessary. I can tell you if somebody can read or cannot read without giving that test. The big question becomes, what do we do then? And I go to something that is very important in education that we do not have. Equity in education. Equity in education. I'm talking about to each kid according to its needs. To each kid according to what they need, not according to one mathematical formula that says all kids are the same. Per pupil based funding is wrong. It is wrong for our kids. By the way, this is what happens with that kind of funding. You end up with schools that have, okay, maybe the same amount as that school and that school, but this school has resources outside of the school, and they bring it in, baby. They really do. They fundraise and they bring tons of money in. All of a sudden, this school that to begin with was better off because they have a stable, financially stable community, has more money than this other school that didn't. And what we gotta do is provide equity in education, really, to each kid according to his or her needs. You know what? In terms of funding, we gotta follow the child. That is a Montessori statement that applies beautifully in here. Follow the child.
Okay. Over, your turn.
Hi, I'm Ellen Gradman, and one thing I want to say, and to address this gentleman's issue about testing, is that if only standardized tests work that way. As a teacher, and I even remember this as a student, as a teacher, we never receive the tests after the kids take them. So a test would be you give the kid, as the student, a test, they take the test, and then you look at it and you go over what they did right and what they did wrong. You never see the test as a teacher. The kids never see the test again. They just get a number. So it's not telling you anything. It's not giving you any data of anything. The best way to evaluate a child is by their teacher and the child themselves, and by a portfolio and work over time. I do also want to I want to go back to the first question that Katie Osgood brought, because you didn't answer it. Because she was talking about her severe special ed kids at a school that she's teaching at. It's not just because these kids have to get ready for the world that, with tests and the real world, and I don't ascribe to any of that, because that's not such a great world to get ready for. That needs to be changed. But the students that she works with should not have to suffer through a test that they're not going to do well on anyways, but they're being forced to take, and that causes them so much stress. And they're not getting their IEP minutes. She's being taken out of her class to go into other classes so that she's not helping her kids. And these kids' life, special ed kids, need really extreme structure. These kids, for that entire testing season, have no structure left, and they start falling apart. So can you please address that issue and that question? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a very real issue that we do need to address, and look at the current system and what's happening and provide opportunities to improve on that. I totally agree that that's an issue that needs to be addressed, and through collaboration with the state and through collaboration with teachers, and looking at what the model is and how we handle situations like that, I think is really critical.
Question.
Yeah, my name's Wendy Catton, and I have a question for Mary, and that is, can you explain why the State Board of Education has taken such a firm stand against parental opt-out rights, and in fact sent letters to all districts more than once that there are no rights for parents to opt their kids out of these tests, and also threatened to yank state funding for that, which is not a requirement?
I think we probably could have done a better job communicating our stance. It's a federal law. It's required that we give this test. And there's no provision in the law for an opt-out. We have another law that requires daily PE in the state of Illinois, but there is, within that structure of that law, there's provisions, there's a waiver that you can apply for so that you don't have daily PE. There's not anything like that in the ESEA. And that's what we said. We said there's no opt-out provision. Students can refuse the test, and they are, but we have not favored opt-out because we believe in this test. We believe it is a better test. I hope that it will one day give teachers much more, give information much more quickly. And again, it is a matter of making sure that all students are tested, that we know how our subgroups are doing. Until recently, we didn't have that, and I do think that's crucial information that we as a society need to have to make sure that all children have access to a high quality education, that everyone that comes through a public school, if we could do it without a test, I don't know, I just haven't heard like a really clear way of getting that information. How all schools are performing, if all schools are, how all students are performing on a statewide basis and a national basis.
So there is a model. There's something called matrix testing or matrix sampling, where not all kids are tested on all aspects of the assessment. Mm-hmm. The National Assessment of Educational Progress uses that process. It's very successful in getting the pulse of states and getting the pulse of regions and the country.
Are you talking about the NAEP?
The NAEP.
Yeah, but not all students with disabilities are always taking that test. There's holes within that where we're not really getting the full picture.
It depends on what you're trying to get an answer to.
Because it's voluntary. And
it depends on what you're trying to get an answer to. As to the function, so it comes back to the issue of different assessments were designed for different purposes and different functions. And we need to take that into account. And we need to know, well, what is the question we're trying to answer? And what is the most appropriate set of indicators for that question, to answer that question? In the case of special education students, the kind of standardized test where they sit and write answers, I mean, I can't imagine most special ed students that being a fair test. It just can't be. So for a lot of them. But, you know, there are states that, because of NCLB, there are a lot of states that have spent a huge amount of money trying to develop assessments that would be fair and would be equitable for special ed needs. It's 1% of the student population. They've spent a huge amount of money trying to develop these assessments. So, you know, it's a kind of double-edged sword. Now, I think to come back to the issue of what about judgments closer to the child's performance on a day-to-day basis? Why are those not taken? Why can't there be a system for using that sort of assessment, which is much closer to what students are doing on a day-to-day basis? Why can't we develop some indicators that tell us how students are doing at that level?
Okay, we're running out of time, so we have 2 people waiting with questions. Can you be very brief?
I'll be very brief. So I just want to say, you said that right now we're kind of like on the warming stage of the park, and that you're hoping it'll give us better information, better feedback, and that this is a better test than the ones we had before. And you know what? I've heard this so many times before. Here's my list. I started with the Iowa Test to Basic Skills. Then they said the IGAP is going to be a better test. Then they said the ISAT is going to be a better test. Then they said the NWA map is going to be a better test. Now they're saying the park is going to be a better test. I'm saying it's not a problem with the test, it's a problem with the testing.
Did you want to add to that briefly?
The thing I was going to mention, you know, with respect to leaving children behind, all the students who are English language learners, Spanish dominant, who are taking the math part of the park this year in Spanish, those tests were never field tested on anyone. So those questions have never been shown to anyone before. So how are we not leaving those kids behind? I mean, that's a joke, right? That's just a terrible, terrible thing to pretend we're doing this for those kids when actually we're doing it as a show, and it's terrible.
One more question on either side, and then we're wrapping up, I think.
I think it would be important for us to hear from a student voice. So,
yes.
So before I start, I just want to say that I have a friend who's in her 8th grade year at Lane Tech Academic Center, and for a class, she basically planned out the next 4 years for her time in high school, and the actual amount of teaching that they're doing without testing, she'll have 2 weeks of actual testing. For the remainder of her 8th grade year, for freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior, there'll only be 2 weeks of actual testing, of teaching without testing. So, so I'm in 7th grade, and a lot of people know that 7th grade is a really important year because it's the grades and the test scores from this year that decide what high school, if you're going to get into a selective enrollment school. And so I have seen a lot of people give up a lot of amazing talents and hobbies to start doing test prep and to study 3 to 4 hours a day because this is what they're facing, is a high-stakes test that's going to determine the next 4 years of their lives. And so I just want to ask, because I'm more than a score, and my classmates are more than a score, but the testing is making us, the testing is taking away what makes us more than a score. And so I was wondering if the state and city representatives think that the culture around the NWEA, specifically with, hours of test prep and hours of studying, if you think that's necessary to take away the personality and the almost free time of a student.
Thank you for sharing. It's really good to hear from you. I think that somebody had brought up test prep earlier, and I feel like test prep is an unfortunate situation. And I really think that it's a bigger testament to how can we work together to make sure that the learning experiences that students are experiencing in the classroom are rich and diverse and multifaceted, and that the assessments that you receive as a result of that are really in line to all of the experiences that you have already been, doing in class, so that it really does fit. And there was, even in the video, there was a student that talked about the lack of relevance, and I'm taking assessments that have nothing to do with what I'm learning in the classroom, and that's a really discouraging piece of feedback and an important piece of feedback to push us, whether it's at the state level, at the district level, in the classroom, to ensure that we're providing as much alignment as possible and that there is a relevance. I think that when we created the interdisciplinary Latino and Latin American curriculum studies, we charged ourselves to try to, and even with the African and African American studies, provide learning opportunities for students that were rich, that were Common Core aligned, that provided pacing, that provided supports for different types of learners, that was just that, right? Something that's fun and cool, and we can learn about different cultures, and we can get engaged in higher level thinking and critiquing reasoning and understanding what's happening in the world, while at the same time, you're doing all of that and learning the pieces that you need to learn. And so I think that's really important feedback, and I think that's your charge to us, to work collectively at all levels to make sure that we really are providing experiences for you that align and that they don't feel like that.
So even my test prep teacher, whose job is to teach kids the things that they'll need to take this test, has told me and the people in my class that there are questions on the test that we shouldn't know, that are there purposely with the people who created the test, knowing that we won't know them, so that they can see where we are. So if we're supposed to be learning these things in the classroom and not supposed to be doing test prep, why are there questions that we shouldn't know?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question.
I don't know. Can I speak to that? I mean, I think what that really speaks to is that there's this whole, at this age of like 12 or even younger now, if you're applying earlier, these children realize that the resources that are going to be provided to them educationally in high school are dependent on their test score, and it's like a Hunger Games sort of situation, and they know, like, they're not test prepping because they think that's a valuable educational experience. They're test prepping because that is what's going to earn them a place at a school that actually has extracurricular activities, that has decent facilities, that has labs. We know that the leadership of CPS thinks to themselves, oh, well, this is going to be a selective enrollment high school, so now we're going to have labs and a good gym, and we're going to pick up the broken glass on the playground. That is not a made-up quote. That is what Tim Cawley said at a board meeting this year. And we know that that is how education is handed out in this city, and the fact that we're stressing like a baby here about that just makes me sick. It makes me sick to my stomach to know that these babies are fighting for this in the richest country in the world.
Last question.
Hello. I just wanted to speak to this. I actually grew up in Evanston, so I didn't grow up in CPS, and this was many years ago, obviously. But standardized testing is something that very personally affected me, because when I was growing up, I couldn't take, when I was in elementary school, I couldn't take the standardized test in the room with the rest of the kids, because I think we were doing the California Achievement Test at the time, because I would look at the pictures and the problems, it'd be multiple choice, and there'd be a picture of 3 little bears on the page, and would ask a question about how many bears there were, and I, instead of seeing it as a math problem, I would see it as a narrative, and I would actually start to have a conversation with the bears in the middle of the class. Hello, little bears. Why are there only 3 of you? Where'd the rest of the bears go? So I had to do all my testing in a private room with the principal supervising me. And this went on. I mean, I eventually stopped talking to test, but I mean, I've never been a good test taker. Whether it be a multiple choice, a short answer, an essay test. If you put me in a room and you set a timer and say, do this now, I just can't relate to it. I was able to get into a good college not because I was good at taking the SAT and the ACT. I took test prep, I struggled with it, I took the SAT 4 times. 3 of those 4 times, I got horrible grades. 1 time in the middle, I happened to get a good grade. I think the entire math section must have been experimental that time. But I was able to get into a good college, not because of my testing ability, but because I had certain teachers that were able to look at me and say, okay, you want to do a short story as part of the essay assignment, you want to do a play, develop a play or a skit about this essay assignment, and let me relate to the material in my own way, the way that my brain worked. That's what able to get me through. College, I struggled with that because obviously there's less sort of one-on-one where the teacher actually didn't like college. But now, I mean, I'm a video editor, I'm successful. I mean, I found a career that worked, but I mean, there are jobs that involve being good at tests that obviously I wouldn't be good at. I don't know how you assess my skill unless you sort of let me do my own thing and get to know how I relate to stuff.
Okay. And so now, from the school project, there is Laura.
I think Emily's going to say something first.
Yeah, thank you guys very much for being here tonight and for participating in the discussion. And let's give a big round of applause for our moderator, Linda Lentz, and all of our panelists. Thanks, you guys. We also have a 2-question survey that you should have gotten at the door with your program, or you can pick up by the registration outside. And if you could please fill that out and then drop it in the box at the registration table, that would be awesome. And also, we would like to congratulate Linda Lentz and Catalyst for their 25th anniversary this year. Linda, do you have some highlights that you wanted to share?
Why, yes, I happen to have a few things to say. Thank you very much. Please take a handful of these postcards and deliver them to your friends. It spells out things we're going to be doing throughout our 25th anniversary year, including forums like this, but on other topics, and our classroom story slams, and we have one this Thursday at a hot place on West Randolph called Red Kiva, and we're going to have a story slam with Ray Salazar, who is a blogger against a Montessori teacher, and Laura Washington's going to be one of the judges, and we have a DJ, and it's like really cool. The other thing is we have a whole page devoted to all of our 25th anniversary stuff on our website, and it includes an almanac where each week we dig into the past to talk about something that happened, we update it to what's happening now, and then we kind of look to the future. So I encourage you to go to our website was on here, click on the 25th anniversary logo, and you'll learn more. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There's a couple other people I wanted to recognize. First, Emily, who's done a great job with managing this event. Kylie Spahn, who's a parent in the audience. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. She did our first Reddit AMA this week, which was a fun little exercise, and we're going to hopefully do another one with someone coming from the other side of the debate, someone who sees the value in testing is going to talk about that with the online community. We have a website where we're collecting people's stories, so if you have a story about public education or about testing or just your experiences in the school system, we'd love to hear from you. Please either share there or share it with your friends who might have really interesting stories that we can collect and hopefully keep as a evidence of what this project has accomplished once we are through with all of our events. We have a lot of partners. I wanted to call one out specifically, StoryCorps. That's another way that we're also collecting stories, and we'll be sharing them. So they have some materials out in the lobby that you can pick up if you'd like to sign up for a session or if you'd like to encourage a friend to do so. And finally, we have 2 more events coming up. Our next event is on April 25th. It's at 2 p.m. It's also here. It's co-sponsored with WTTW Chicago, and that event is on charter schools. It's going to be directed by Bob Hercules, our executive producer, and it's going to be really interesting. And again, I'm sure we'll have a very great back and forth debate on that subject. So I encourage you all to come to that. Thank you for coming.